Fingers crossed. How's that?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
What has happened?
Norfolk
Okay.
story. Yeah.
Okay,
So
so if everybody just pops herself on mute, and then Andrew's going to take questions at the end, but you could use the chat function during the evening if you want to leave him a question for the end. But if not, Andrew, over to you.
That's really kind. Thank you. As Paula says, yeah, please put the questions in the chat function if you think of one as we're going. But I'll pick them all up at the end if that's okay. We have got a couple of we've got one video in this presentation and also a scheme fly through. What we have found earlier is that the fly through can be slow on some people's computers. So I apologise if it is slow coming through because it's quite a lot of capacity on it, but it's quite interesting and hopefully you will get the gist of what we're going to show. So I really welcome you tonight. Thank you, members. It's really nice to be able to do this because this is a story that probably started in sort of 2011, 2012. And it's probably it's 10 years of the development team's work really. So and hopefully you find this interesting. I really do hope so. So it's all about the North Norfolk story. So the story begins. As I've said, once upon a time there were two organisations, and both organisations really had the same issue. Probably at the time we didn't quite realise it, but the Housing Association and Broadland, we at the time we had a slowing delivery of affordable housing, especially in the rural areas in the countryside. It was getting more and more difficult to deliver, and I will explain why as I go through. Interestingly, North Norfolk District Council also, as a local authority, they'd done well through the early 2000s in terms of delivery, but they were finding the forward forecast, which they always look forward in development, was becoming a little bleak, and there was various reasons for that. One of them was their local plan was operating well. However, a lot of the sites were being quite delayed in delivery, and it still is delayed in delivery. One of those is at Fakenham, and also they were finding exception side or rural housing delivery was slowing as well. So one day we had a conversation. Relationship with North Norfolk and Broadland was growing and had grown over the sort of 8 years before this time. We'd had a very successful scheme at Formston, which I'll put a little bit more detail, and it sort of paved the way to open up further conversations. That was just beyond us picking up the phone saying we were delivering something. That was actually partnership type conversations. We put time aside to map out a potential solution for both parties, but some of the key changes for Broadland at that time was that we'd pulled out of the Homes England, it was called HCA grant programme, the Homes England grant programme at the time. The documentation for that bid round for affordable housing, this is where housing associations go for grant funding, the gap funding for developments, had changed. The whole model was changing within Homes England. And what had happened was grant rates were reducing. And what we found was when we'd bid for a certain grant rate, which the association's business plan could cope with, there was other housing associations in Norfolk undercutting that grant rate, and we eventually, which was a very, very difficult thing to do, we eventually said no, we can't do it. Now it's a bit of a shock for a housing association when it says we've got no grant, because actually what that means is that is incredibly difficult to deliver any development program at all. So we had to look to reinvent. That was the key for us, was to try and reinvent the delivery model for not just rural housing, but also for housing generally. We also, because of the conversation, the national planning framework at the time had opened up. What I mean by that is the national planning framework is the big strategic document in the UK that delivers the framework for planning, as it says in the words. That framework had opened up in terms of market housing and was able to start to cross and cross-subsidise or help the delivery of affordable housing in rural areas. And I'll explain that type of planning in a minute. In 2006, the association took the view that we needed a market vehicle in the future. This is a market housing vehicle in the future to help. So we were quite early on thinking in that way, but we were trying to find a solution to how to fund that vehicle, that company, to be able to get other funding from banks, etc. So it's trying to find the equity funding for that company to start. That's the setup funding. At the time, we weren't able to use our existing loan finance in Broadland Housing Association, so it was becoming quite difficult. So we also had to find a solution for that as well. Rural housing at the time was increasing in cost, and it has increased in cost again to deliver. It's the extra bits that we need to deliver. There's normally electricity issues or power issues, utility, highways issues, pathways. There's all sorts of things, footpaths, etc. There's all sorts of things that are extra that go onto a rural housing site. So the cost has always been challenging. And because of that cost being challenging, design had never quite reached the mark. And that was right across the board. So it's an increasing hurdle to try and gain community support. If you looked at consultations over the years before this time, then it was we were getting more and more feedback saying this is not good enough. And actually, if you look around Norfolk in the villages, we probably would have agreed as well. Just going back to Formston, this was how the conversation started. Really, we delivered our first passive house scheme. Which passive house is basically a way of building that is really insulated. It's called airtightness. And that insulation, of course, reduces the heating energy that's required for that house. So when we built these houses, basically they had no central heating at all, which was quite amazing. It's timber frame. It was built by a partner of ours, Lovell, and it was really interesting. This scheme actually won the 2014 Best New Affordable Housing Scheme in the UK. And it actually started, if people watched the Sterling Prize, which is the big prizes in the UK for exceptional development. Goldsmith Street in Norwich actually started on the back of this scheme in Formston, as Norwich City Council came to visit us to see how to do it. And we were finalists that year of the Passive House Award. So this is actually one of the key schemes that started this journey. So chapter 2, what could a solution look like after we've had that discussion? Well, I knew that NNDC had some land, so that's always a key for a development director to know where the land is. So I knew there was some land in the local authority. Over the years, we'd got land out of local authorities that was free, and actually it was getting more and more difficult for consent to get free land out of local authorities, mainly because of funding cuts for everything else. They needed cash. So actually it was key for that conversation with NNDC to get a return on the land. How far could I take exception site planning? So the changes in the National Planning Framework were based on exception sites. An exception site is where a housing association in a community with a population of under 3,000 can get planning for affordable housing that is on the boundary or outside the development boundary of a village. So it enables us to deliver sites on a lower land price, basically. What that planning framework had done was allowed a mix of affordable housing and market housing to be on that site, as long as the market housing, the quantity of it, was no more than was required to deliver the affordable housing. I hope that's clear. So it was, how far could we push that planning arena? How far could we push it to be able to deliver what we needed to? At the time, funding was still required for Broadland St Benedict's. That's now changed thanks to our finance team. But at the time, we needed to find that funding solution. How could we deliver in one village? And the idea was, how could we deliver in one village and support another? So what I mean by that is exception site housing meant that really you had to ring fence that delivery, ring fence that cross subsidy, that gap funding created from market housing, and we should have been able to just ring fence that in a village. But was there a way of actually supporting other villages that weren't in such a high priced area? We realized that the market housing really had to reflect the community if we were going to do this, if this was a solution, as well as the affordable. When we design a scheme for affordable housing, then there is a housing need element to that scheme. We have to go and find the housing need. So could we use some of that housing need data, or the way that we do that, to tell us actually what the community needed for market housing as well? This would hopefully help the consultation, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. Also, as I said before, improve the design in Norfolk villages. It is absolutely essential that we're able to do that. And then can we do all that without any grant? So the first ideas, this is actually, I found this on a flip chart that we actually did. This is one of our first ideas of how to get this to work. So with the conversation with North Norfolk District Council, could we get them to help fund both organisations? Could we get funding into Broadland St Benedict's, which was the market vehicle, to help that, so we could go and get more funding from banks? And could we also help the association with funding as well to actually deliver the affordable housing? So this is a very quick picture. So some key elements in this structure that really helps us is that Broadland St Benedict's is a limited company. So that's a private limited company, wholly owned by Broadland Housing Association. It's 100% owned by the association. But the great thing in there is that in terms of tax, the limited company can gift aid. You see gift aid on a lot of charity donations. Can use gift aid, so that's the profits can come into Broadland Housing without having to pay tax, as it's a not-for-profit charity. So it's really how we could use the model here to deliver, to maximise that delivery of affordable housing and maximise the money coming through into the housing association. So the result, this is chapter 3, the result. So the result of this is that NNDC identified 5 sites, which to be honest, I knew they had anyway, so that was good. So NNDC identified 5 sites: Great Ryborough, Binham, Trunch, Edgefield and Erpingham. Now I've only got 4 of them up here because I couldn't find the 5th, but we had Erpingham, Edgefield, a little bit of an issue with access with the land. We had to come through an existing scheme. We had a very narrow highway access. So we approached, as any good developer would, we approached the next door neighbour, which was the Stoddy estate. And the McNichol family allowed us to buy an additional area of land at Edgefield that enabled an access to come through to the NNDC land. And then at the time, and it didn't become part of the planning application, but at the time, Broadland had a site at Bodham, which we were just gaining planning on. And actually, we put that into the pot at the time, just to show the councillors that we were putting land into this project. So these numbers actually do include Bodham. So you will hear a different number later on in the I just must explain that in the presentation. So the property numbers were 112 plots across those sites. You can see the affordable mix and the market mix, and on any private development, that is a hell of a percentage for affordable housing. A Section 106 is a planning agreement that goes alongside a planning permission, and it's used in rural housing to ensure that the affordable housing is kept in perpetuity. So basically, it can't be sold on. So we were wondering if we could connect all those sites by a single Section 106 document. What that allowed us to do would be allow us to move monies from village to village. So where we had a higher value village, such as Binham up in North Norfolk, in one of the platinum areas of North Norfolk, we could fund affordable housing in the village of Trunch, which is up in the northeast of North Norfolk district. So what that Section 106, if we could get it through planning, that's what that allowed us to do, which would make this project work. So we were able to do one viability right across the 5 sites. What that viability means is that we put all the financial monies together and show that actually the whole thing could deliver that percentage of housing. We also looked at North Norfolk District Council and said, can we have some money? So to help us do this, so there was a loan arrangement between NNDC and both BHA and BSB. So that's Broadland Housing Association and Broadland St Benedict's. That loan arrangement had to go out to tender, would you believe? This is the procurement rules that we have to deal with. And actually Broadland were the only people that replied. So that was great. So that was able to come across the project. So what I'm going to do is show you a video of the project now, which will put a little bit more meat on what I've just said. This was a video that we did in 2020 in lockdown 1 for the Eastern Region Town Planning Awards. I'm pleased to say, as you can see, we were actually the winner of that, which is great for affordable housing. We were the only affordable housing submission, and we've gone forward to the national finals, which is at the end of April, and looking at the competition, I think we've probably got a good chance. So here we go. Oh, shoot.
Should there be sound, Andrew?
Yeah, hang on. Sorry. Thank you. Michael's just teams me, so hang on. It's my fault. Hang on, we're going to go backwards.
I'm relieved you didn't say anything worse than shoot.
Yeah, I know. I was good timing. Hang on. Let's go back. If I share the content again, and I've got to turn that on, you can hear me, can't you? And then go here. Right. And take that. Can you hear that?
Delivery of local rural housing
Yeah.
slowing.
Thank you.
And the funding model was impacting on this delivery of new affordable housing. What Broadland Housing wanted to achieve was to firstly create a sustainable delivery model for rural housing. Secondly, improve design within building projects. Local communities were resisting new development in villages. Design was part of the issue and was raised at local consultations. And thirdly, to work within the changes to the national planning framework, so Broadland could maximise the use of exception site planning policy. So, a project plan was developed between Broadland Development Team, the wider consultant team, and Norfolk Strategic Housing Team. The framework for our project was based on cross-subsidy, created from open market housing sales to fund affordable housing delivery. Exception site planning criteria changed to include market sales as long as they did the viability of individual schemes and did not make excess surplus. So 5 sites were identified across the North Norfolk district, a combination of land within NNDC ownership and third-party landowners. Crucially, Broadland created a land value for all landowners, including NNDC. The team created 96 plots across the 5 sites, 61 affordable and 35 open market. The project produced a return of 63% affordable housing, all with local lettings and local sales criteria attached. As the project progressed and local housing need was looked into in more depth, the tenure mix unfolded in each of the 5 villages. Some villages have more affordable need, others were more viable through higher market sales values. Exception site policy had been about individual villages and the supply of housing to that individual village. What the Broadland team negotiated was a single Section 106 across all 5 locations. This allowed surplus monies from one village to help finance affordable housing within another. A very simple change. However, this allowed Broadland to deliver a much more strategic view and delivery of a range of housing to the local communities of North Norfolk. In addition, this allowed the design team more freedom to develop designs for each individual site that reflected the village. built on the traditional feel of North Norfolk villages, but adding a contemporary touch where appropriate, so improving the whole design of a Broadland project. The collaboration between the wider Broadland team has created a project to 5 sites that has achieved what the organisation set out to do. However, the personal stories are sometimes much more important, such as helping a daughter return to the village of Trunch. She was able to rent the house that backs onto her mother's existing bungalow. Broadland then put a gate in the fence for them to be able to see each other. This is the achievement of something quite special, created from using national planning policy at a very local level.
So thank you for listening to that. Oh God, it's starting again. There we go. Thank you for listening to that. It probably it shows it much better than I said in the first instance. Other outputs, though, if I move on. So chapter 4, other outputs. Design was one of the drivers in the model, and bottom, which we'd already had planning for, was used at the base of the model, and it was the second phase we put in, so of an existing scheme, so we could physically see the differences to our design. We within the time of planning, we dealt with a whole load of standard house types. They were developed. This was really important for our construction costs, but it also still enabled all our designers to have that flexibility to do what they do best in terms of that external design and how they worked, and they got tweaked as we went, so we learned an awful lot about those standard house types. Landscaping and road layouts became much more important to define the schemes. You know, it was such an important step forward. Really, was actually in thinking about those first before we did anything else. And this was all done where in the back of our minds we've been second guessing how climate change, how the changes to building regs in the future, would net zero come back or not? You know, all that sort of stuff was being talked and thought about at the same time. So what this is bottom phase 1, built in about 2008. Local firm Draper and Nichols from Norwich built this. You can see this is our starting point in putting flint back in, the state railing. It's, you know, we still had to do, unfortunately, with the highways with the black tarmac, but you can start to see that it was starting to change in terms of our design thought. However, when we got to bottom phase 2, which was, I suppose, 2015, you can see how we'd started to move on. We're still using flint, but the type of housing was changing dramatically, and you can see in the photograph on the right hand side the end of phase 1 and the start of phase 2 coming through. The use of the road is not just a straight road anymore. You know, we're starting to put the curves into the roads. The landscaping is starting to change, and this is where that design influence, being able to put 6 market housing into this scheme of 16 houses, was able to just give us that extra flexibility in terms of finance to start producing much better design housing. Also, part of that design was highway specification. I mean, this was actually Erpingham layout, but I've used it because we have some really interesting challenges, and any developer would say it with highways, because they have a massive color palette of black. And actually, what we're trying to do is really create design in the changing of the textures of our highways and how all the footpaths work, etc. And it is very, very difficult when you're up against these constraints. If we wish to adopt roads, so that means they get looked after by the county highways team, it basically means we have to use their standards, and that's become very difficult, and will do over the future, to produce anything that we want adopted to enable better design. So the other outputs is, in terms of planning, pushing the boundaries of that planning sometimes needs a rethink of approach. We started talking to the planners about each separate scheme as we would develop, and actually it just wouldn't work. First, we had to go back to the point where we had to educate, and we had to educate the planners about what we're trying to do and how they could actually use that national planning framework in a really positive way. We had the help, of course, of Nicola Turner at North Norfolk at the time as well, and actually being able to have that strategic housing team help us negotiate that was really helpful. The planners came round, and eventually we used to have design meetings for the whole project, so they can start to understand how that cross subsidy was working. This was a major change, and the first time this section 106, this one section 106, had been used in the UK in this way. Parish councils all have a different makeup, and it was quite difficult at the time, and it taught us an awful lot about consultation, because if you think about it, with Binham, where we were funding Trunch and Great Rybra's affordable housing through the scheme at Binham, we had to try and explain that. We had to try and educate the parish council why we wanted to take money out of their village. That was how it was seen. So that was a big ask for parish councils to actually support that. I'm not suggesting we got complete support in Binham, but they have found the way to understand it, and they were really, we had some really grown up conversations with parish councils, and I think it taught myself and the team actually how to approach parish councils in a very different way, and has certainly helped in the future, which I'll explain in a minute. Viability approach as well. We put the viability straight into the planning application, which was the way to do it. So we put all five sites together in the planning application rather than trying to do separate viabilities for everything. We also negotiated 1 day of planning applications. That was a long day, but we had 5 applications all in 1 day with the committee. We got 4 in 1 day and got them through, and we had to go back with Binham with a few changes. But actually, the committee really got it, and that was absolutely essential, that they understood what we were trying to do here, and they were really supportive, but still giving us the fun of going to planning committee as well. And then putting together a team of consultants. We've done this over a long period of time, and it does pay off. Procurement doesn't always help us in housing associations to build a team of people round, but we found a way to do that over time, and it has really paid off, as you can see through the projects in the video. Construction, we had various questions asked. Why not passive again, or green credentials? And the reason for that was that we'd already got to our building frame. We've always been very fabric first, you hear, in the construction industry, but since 2003, 2004, that thought line has always been with the development team, and so we'd actually got the frame of our buildings to a point where an EPC, an energy performance certificate of B, and they run from A down to G, and we'd already got the frame there, so we felt that actually we had a little bit of time to concentrate on the design elements of it and actually getting other things right, rather than actually having to think about the passive or the green credentials. We're doing an awful lot for fuel poverty, which is one of the drivers of our corporate strategy. We procured separate contractors on separate tenders, and that was done on purpose, really, rather than having one contractor for one tender. We wanted to see the difference. We wanted to see if our contracting base, and I know I've got some of them online tonight, could get what we were doing, and I think that was achieved in what we did, and it adds a little bit of competition in there as well, which is always good fun. We didn't quite get the correct match with every project, but I think we've learned how to do that, and I think over time that will get better and better. We do have limitations to our approach in construction, because we use a thing called a design and build contract, which basically means we put the risk over to the contractor. We've created a little bit of a hybrid versions over the years because of our relationships with our contracting team, our contracting pool, and I think that will get better and better as we move forward. Something that came out of it in our specifications was a house passport. So we now create a passport with every house, which gives the contractor the idea of which tenure it is, what specification it is, what kitchen does it look like, all those things, which seems so simple, but something that we didn't have before this project started. And then after sales does need a look at in the future. We've learnt an awful lot through market housing after sales, and actually we need to do that better in the future, which we're talking to my excellent colleagues in customer services about at the moment. In terms of construction, this was Binham, and you can see it's a lovely site on the edge of the village. 27 dwellings on this site. Why I'm showing you this in terms of construction, we learnt an awful lot about phasing, which I know John Smith's on the line tonight, but we learnt an awful lot about phasing, and actually between the two of us, we probably didn't get it quite right, I think, is probably at the time, and certainly it's helped other projects. So the only way you can do things is actually do it in my book, and actually we've learned how to phase much easier, so it allows us to get market housing out of the development much quicker than we did here at Binham, and because of that caused us a few cash flow problems on Binham as a development on its own, but actually those learnings we're going to take forward, and we've worked with all our contractors in a really positive way to make sure we can, with the limitations of design and build contracts, to make sure that it's much smoother in the future. So it was an excellent outcome, really. In terms of other outputs, sales and marketing, I mean, we did sales and marketing for shared ownership. We've either used agents or used our sales team internally, but this was really different when we're putting market housing on top as well, because we're having to understand the competition. So we did a lot of journeys around sales homes or show homes in Norfolk, understanding what competition we had. Specification internally and externally had to be looked at in a completely different light, and what it's done is actually improved what we're doing and improved our relationship with our asset management team internally as well, because there was an awful lot went on to try and align all sorts of specifications that we were doing, but also making sure that we got a specification for each individual marketplace that we're selling into. Education for agents, that's another. They had to understand what was going on. Who are we? We suddenly came out of nowhere, and we've got all these sites sitting in North Norfolk. So there was a massive education there for them, and actually finding the right agents who would listen was a real learning. And I'm quite, we had to make some commercial decisions in this where we didn't feel an agent at the time on one of the sites was really listening to what we are, who we were, and so we did change them. But that's the commercial reality of what we're now doing. And then how could we use housing need data to inform the market mix? So we're not just building 5-bedroom houses. You've noticed that in the schemes. We are actually building what the village needed. And we found in North Norfolk over the years that actually that's what they've had. They've had 4- and 5-bedroom houses in the villages. And actually what they need is 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom market housing. And we've got that opportunity to be able to do that. You also see from the brochures, these are our 4 brochures, how they've changed. The Hoppings was the first one, interesting title, but they did sell at Bodham, and Priory News was the last one that we've done, and you can see the difference in the style that's happening through. So we're learning how to market, and it's been really good, education. So what are we doing now? Well, the relationship between North Norfolk District Council and Brawley is excellent. It's still good. And Nicola has moved on to Great Yarmouth, but we have a fantastic strategic housing team there. And what's happened because of what we've done in terms of design is success has brought a number of opportunities. You can see we've already got planning submitted in Haysborough, North Reps, Roughton, Corpus is just about to go in, and Hindringham. We've got another 5 sites in design with West Beckham. Swantonovas is a community land trust with the same landowner at Formerston who's come back and said, yep, you did okay first time, let's have another go. And Blakeney, how important is it to get local housing in Blakeney and Salthouse and Wivton? So they're great. And now we've moved the model into Breckland. So this cross subsidy model is now in Great Hockham, which we're just about to start in a few months' time. We're also now looking at North Elmham and East Tuddenham, the parish councils. We won those on competition against other housing associations, and we're using the past past design work that we've done and the past sites now to actually promote what we've been doing. And we're early days in Kings Lynn at the moment, trying to get it to work there. And we've also brought this model into the centre of Norwich. We've got the large development at Carrow Road, Canary Quay at the moment, and we've got 16 flats left if anybody wants to spend some money on a flat, and that's the website to register your interest. Just going through some of the schemes that I've talked about. This is Hindringham. It's a little site in Hindringham that we're doing. And the great thing is there's still tenure blind. You don't know where the affordable housing is. It could be anywhere in that site. It's something that's so important to us that actually everything is. This is development. It's not about the tenure mix. And you can see it was a lovely story at Binham when we had a shared ownership house alongside a market rented house, and the rented house had the flint and everybody thought it was the shared. That's the whole point about it, that actually nobody knows. This is the back of that site, and you can see that we're using all sorts of different. We've got bungalows coming in, and the terrace that's semi-detached, and some detached houses as well. But it's all mixed up, and that's really cool. Right, at Corpusty, this is chapter 5 continued. At Corpusty, I'm just about to show you a fly-through of a scheme at Corpusty that we're designing. It's the largest one we've done so far. So this is 38 houses, and what we found in terms of design is how do we keep what we're doing in the smaller sites into a bigger site. Unfortunately, we've got no musical sound on this, but you might have the joy of some of my commentary coming in. This is where had a slight problem earlier, so it is slow at some stages. So I do apologise if I'm faster than what you're seeing. So this is coming in from Norwich Road in Corpusty, a lovely village in North Norfolk, and we come left into what we're designing. We're picking up, these are all standard house types, so there is nothing here that is that is been designed bespoke. But actually what we're doing is changing the window types, we're changing how they look by the materials. And the big issue we thought with this site was how do we not turn it into just 38 houses in a block. So what we've done here is created little courtyards, and you've seen 2 already. This is the second. I hope you're running as fast as I am. But we see little courtyards coming off the main spine, coming through. Hopefully you're up to speed where I am. This is a 1-bedroom house that we've used at Edgefield very successfully. And across on the left-hand side is some bungalows that we've used, standard house type, or we've used at Trunch. We're moving away from garages and more to cart lodge type accommodation. One is cost. A garage is amazingly expensive to build for some reason, but also we're trying to in the future get a photovoltaic answer, so it's actually an energy cart lodge in the future, and with some battery storage at the back of it, so that's quite cool. The only house type we're having a bit of an issue with is the one, I hope you're the same as me, where we've got the doors on the end elevation. It just needs a little bit more work. This is standard 2-bedroom housing here, but 3-bedroom semi-detached, but turned into a barn type arrangement with the smaller windows. And you can see we've got all these little courtyards coming off that main spine. This comes up further to the back of the site, still using the change in brick and flint, using the flint where we can on the end elevations so it stands out. And they're very shared spaces. You can see that we've had to move away from the black tarmac, so a lot of this we've got to work out how we don't adopt some of these areas so we can actually do what we want to do here, and still make it cost effective for the association in the future to be able to maintain. Really, really important where we've got that extra maintenance in the future, that we keep the costs down. Big issue we've got at Corpusty is surface water. For the developers that are developing in North Norfolk, it's a really big issue at the moment. The building regulations on surface water discharge, well, that's how you get your surface water off your site, is getting more and more difficult. So I will show you a solution that we've got in a minute. I'm hoping this is going up and people are at the same speed as I am, but this is going up into the air, and you can start to see. We've got to get this right because this is a significant extension really to Corpus D. 38 houses in a village is quite significant. So that's how it sits up above. And you can see it's very, it's not straight roads. We're very higgledy-piggledy in terms of our house design, but we've actually, in terms of our house layouts, but we actually built it. We do the road layouts first and then design the buildings second, so we can get the flow that we want through. The pond, there's an attenuation pond, so that will be holding some of the water before it goes off site. And then we come back down. So there we go. So hopefully you finished. Hopefully you have. So this is the site plan for Corpus D. I just want to, why I've put this up is that you can see this, there's a site to the bottom of the, or to the top of the screen, which has got a big blue thing in it. Now, where I've picked up on surface water constraints and the future, we've got a big issue that actually we would have had to take out nearly 3 or 4 plots out of this site to put another attenuation tank in. We also have got to put then a lot of concrete in the ground to make these tanks hold the water before they disperse from the site. So what we decided to do, there's a piece of land that went across the road that came up for auction in November. So we went and bought that, and we're going to put a surface water pond on the other site that leads out into the River Wensum. So we're doing a much more ecological biodiversity type offset onto that site. That allows us to take less concrete and not put as much into the ground, and we're going to be able to use a swell type thing, which basically means we're putting ditches really within our roads, on the side of the roads, to actually bring that water down into the pond. So hopefully it's going to look a little bit like this, rather than having a big attenuation tank. We're going to open the space up, and in the future we're going to be able to use this for environmental offset as well from smaller sites that we're building in North Norfolk, where we're not able to get as much biodiversity onto that site. We can actually use our own land to be able to do that in the future. So chapter 6, I'm nearly there. I'm nearly finished. COVID time, the future. COVID time has been really quite interesting. Who would have thought that we would end up with a stock of one house at this point tonight? In terms of market housing, so sales performance has been absolutely amazing. I think this time last year, or nearly this time last year, we were really redoing our business plan, saying I don't think we're going to sell anything this year. All our shared ownership is sold or under offer on all these sites. So sales performance has been superb. But the designers help that, the mixers help that. And actually what's really interesting is the market housing purchasers have really understood what we've been trying to do. And certainly where we've had this this mix of tenure on Erpingham and Edgefield especially, it has gone down really well because the market housing purchasers are really, as I say, have really understood it. Shared ownership sold so well at Erpingham that we actually changed a couple of market housing into the shared ownership, and what we've been able to do is improve the specification as we go for the shared ownership, and it's made it a much more marketable product. Consultation has changed, but so how do we talk to people? How do we talk to parish councils in these times? So we've moved to a virtual room solution, using a bit of technology, a little bit like tonight that what we're doing, using ACOM, which is one of our project managers, and then Ingleton Wood decided, one of our architects decided to build one as well. I'll be honest, Ingleton Wood is cheaper, so we've moved to that one, but it's giving the same impact. And then defects process has been much more complicated. So this is where we might have some after problems with the houses. We don't get a lot of it, but you do get some, I'm afraid, where pipes are adjusted. We found, because it's the same as our repair service, we had to sort of, with COVID compliance, it's been really quite complicated to explain to people we can't come, or it's going to take 4 weeks to do that, etc., etc. So this year, that's been the pressures. This is the consultation room that I was talking about. This is the Ingleton Wood one, where actually what you see on site is a parish, see on screen is a parish hall, and we have all our boards, etc. So you can see that see the whole development. What we found with this has been amazing. We had 186 views on this over Christmas. We were able to do it for 2 weeks over Christmas, so it allowed people to be able to respond. And we found actually we got much more people than coming through a parish hall, parish council hall or village hall. What we have with Corpusty as well, large site, a lot of houses on the edge of Corpusty. We had 28 actual replies, which is quite good actually in terms of consultation. 26 of them were positive, and that makes a big difference for planning and real successful consultation. So, but what we've done is engage with the parish council at a very early stage, even online, and they've and we have a lot of track record now to show them what we're trying to do and trying to achieve. So the last slide, chapter 6 continued. I was just going to say there's a few things for the future that we're now introducing. Now we've got sorted with the design, we're sorted with a whole load of stuff. We're now thinking about climate change further. We're talking about zero carbon further, and biodiversity. So they all really knock onto each other. Climate change is a big issue in construction and a big issue in the UK, but it's a big issue in construction. And we're starting to try and go through all our house types, saying, right, how are we constructing now, and what are we going to have to do for the future? We're already, as I've said, got our frames, our frame of our houses up to the building regulation changes for next year, and we're nearly up to the 2025 future house frames as well, where we've got to be in terms of insulation, air tightness, all this sort of stuff, and to make them more and more energy efficient. Standard house layouts we're going to review over the next 12 months because of more office working. People have changed the way that they're living in their houses, and we just want to make sure that we've got that up to date. We've already got that sort of space in our 1-bedroom houses, but we just need to make sure that we're getting all that facility in the rest of the range. Biodiversity is a big issue. We've got this coming into planning now, where we've got to put 10% more back into a scheme, quite rightly, in terms of landscaping, planting trees, how we treat all the animal movements, etc., through a site. So that's been really good. And I've said before, we've got the land at Corpusty now to be able to offset some of that onto our smaller sites where we haven't got room to be able to do that. And also we've got a site up at Roughton, which has got a couple of acres on the back of it, which we'll be able to do the same with, again, a pond solution going in there. Zero carbon, some people are saying, oh, it's never going to happen, but it is. It's coming into building regs now, which is very different stance than it's been before. Operational energy, there's 2 types of zero carbon. Operational energy, which is how the energy used to run your house. We're doing pretty well because of the frame on that. We've got more to do, but it's the embodied carbon that we're really interested in at the moment. So this goes back into how we're going to construct in the future, is how much carbon we are emitting when we're constructing a house, how much it's in our masonry, our bricks, our foundations, and we're looking all the way through that now with Ingleton Wood, one of our consultants. We've built an embodied carbon calculator, and we're just looking at, if we change from masonry to timber, what does that mean? Masonry to steel frame, what does that mean? We're doing all that sort of work at the moment, and we're working with a firm up in North Norfolk at the moment on recycled aggregates for concrete as well, which is really interesting. And then the conclusion of this is that we started with passive house at Fulmerston, and by 25, 26, it may well be that we have to go back to passive house. And that really depends on how the business, how Broadland Housing look at and define our carbon in the future. Now, it may be that we need on all our new builds to make them work much harder. And if that is the case, then we may in the future have to go back to where we started this presentation in 2012. That is it. These are the acknowledgements for all the people that have helped us, apart from the Broadland development team, and there is many more as well. We have to work with an awful lot of people to get these projects sorted, and that's the end. Thank you very much indeed.